The wind was already screaming down Main Street, rattling the loose tin signs and driving needles of ice into anything that dared move outside. 16-year-old Eliza Hart stood on the front porch of the only home she had ever known, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her fingers numb around the strap. "You made your choice," her stepfather said from the doorway, his breath puffing white into the dark. "You don't get to live under my roof anymore." Her mother stood behind him, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes fixed on the floor. Eliza wanted to say 1,000 things. She wanted to scream, to beg, to explain herself again. But she'd already done all that, and none of it had mattered. So she turned around and walked down the porch steps. The cold hit her like a slap. By the time she reached the end of the driveway, her ears burned and her toes were already going numb inside her worn sneakers. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have money. She didn't even have a coat thick enough for a Wyoming winter. All she had was a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a flashlight, a pocketknife her real dad had given her before he died, and $200 she'd saved from babysitting and cleaning diner tables. $200 and nowhere to go. She walked. She walked until the town lights faded behind her and the road turned into a narrow dirt track leading up into the low hills beyond Cedar Ridge. She knew these hills. She'd grown up hiking them, chasing grasshoppers in summer, sledding in winter. Halfway up one of those hills was an abandoned mining cut from the 1920s. Just a shallow bite taken out of the earth, half collapsed, forgotten by everyone. That's where she went. By the time she reached it, her legs were shaking and her hands barely worked. She crawled into the shallow hollow, out of the worst of the wind, and curled up on the frozen dirt. That night, she cried quietly into her sleeves until exhaustion took her. She woke up alive. That surprised her. The next morning, her breath fogged in front of her face, and her eyelashes were stiff with frost. She couldn't feel her feet. Panic surged, sharp and hot. She forced herself to stand, stamping her feet, swinging her arms until pain flooded back into her fingers and toes. She needed shelter, real shelter. She went into town once the sun came up, keeping her head down, staying off the main street. She used $40 to buy a cheap sleeping bag, a plastic tarp, duct tape, and a small shovel from the hardware store. The cashier gave her a strange look. "You camping in this weather?" he asked. "Something like that," Eliza said. She spent the rest of the day hiking the hills, looking for a place hidden from the road, shielded from wind, and close enough to a creek she could break ice for water. By late afternoon, she found it. A south-facing slope thick with scrub pine, the ground slanted but stable, the soil firm clay mixed with rock. She started digging. The shovel bit into frozen dirt, each scoop a battle. Her palms blistered, her arms trembled, but she kept going. She dug a trench about 6 feet wide, 8 feet long, and 5 feet deep, piling dirt behind her to make a berm. When darkness fell, she spread the tarp over the hole, weighted it down with rocks, crawled underneath, and curled into her sleeping bag. It was still freezing, but the wind couldn't reach her anymore. The next days blurred into a rhythm of work and survival. She dug deeper and wider, carving out a rectangular chamber in the hillside. She reinforced the walls with scavenged boards from a collapsed shed she found near the creek. She built a crude door from pallet wood and old hinges she pulled from a trash pile behind the hardware store. She used her remaining money to buy a small camping stove, a box of matches, canned beans, rice, oats, and peanut butter. She stretched that food like her life depended on it. Because it did. Each night, she layered pine boughs on the dirt floor, then her sleeping bag, then her clothes. Each morning, she boiled creek water and ate oatmeal, then went back to digging and reinforcing. People in town started whispering when they noticed her buying supplies every few days. A teenage girl, alone, dirty, quiet. Some said she'd run away. Some said she was on drugs. No one asked her anything. She didn't ask them for anything either. By the end of 2 weeks, her dugout cabin took shape. The floor was tamped smooth clay. The walls were lined with boards. The ceiling was supported by thick branches laid across the span, covered with smaller sticks, then packed with a foot of earth on top. She cut a small ventilation hole near the ceiling and ran a metal pipe through it, scavenged from a scrap heap, sealing the gaps with clay. She built a tiny stove from a paint can and ducting. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The first night she lit the stove inside her dugout, the temperature outside dropped to -10. Inside, it hovered just above freezing. She cried again, but this time, it was from relief. By mid-January, a brutal cold snap rolled through Cedar Ridge. The town hit -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Pipes burst. Power lines sagged under ice. The diner closed for 2 days because the kitchen plumbing froze solid. Eliza lay in her dugout cabin, wrapped in her sleeping bag, listening to the wind howl over the buried roof. She checked the cheap thermometer she'd bought for $3 at the drugstore. It read 65 degrees. She blinked. She checked it again. Still 65. She laughed out loud, a wild, disbelieving sound that echoed off the dirt walls. The earth around her held the heat. The insulation she'd built from soil and wood kept the cold out. Her tiny stove barely needed wood to keep the space warm. While the town froze, her little underground home stayed steady and safe. She started sleeping through the night without shivering. She started gaining weight again. She started thinking about more than just surviving until tomorrow. She built shelves. She hung a candle lantern. She carved a small desk from scrap wood and started writing in a notebook she found at a thrift store. She wrote about her dad. About her mom. About the night she was thrown out. About her cabin. In late February, she woke to voices outside. She froze. Her hand closed around her pocketknife. Eliza, a man's voice called softly. She crept to the door and cracked it open. It was Mr. Rourke, the old science teacher from her school. And behind him stood Mrs. Jennings, who ran the library. "We were worried, Mrs. Jennings said, her eyes shining. "We've been seeing you buy food, but no one ever sees you go home." Eliza swallowed. "I'm fine," she said. "I have a place." They followed her inside. They stared. "My God," Mr. Rourke whispered. "You built this." Eliza nodded. "It's warm," Mrs. Jennings said, touching the wall. "It's warmer in here than my house." The next day, word spread. People came by with blankets, with soup, with bread, with firewood. The same town that had ignored her suddenly couldn't stop talking about the dugout cabin. A reporter from the county paper showed up. A week later, a photo of Eliza standing in front of her earth-covered door ran on the front page. "Teen survives winter in self-built dugout," the headline read. Social services came too. This time, she didn't panic. She showed them her cabin, her food supplies, her notebook logs, her school assignments she'd been keeping up with online at the library. She told them everything. They placed her with Mrs. Jennings as a foster guardian. But they let her keep her cabin. On weekends, she went back there. She kept improving it. She added a second room. She added solar lights. She planted a small garden above it in spring. 3 years later, she graduated high school with honors. 5 years later, she got a degree in environmental engineering. 10 years later, she stood in front of a crowd of architects and builders, showing slides of her dugout cabin. "How many of you think you need thousands of dollars to build an efficient home?" she asked. Hands went up. She smiled. "I built mine for 200, she said. "And it saved my life." Somewhere in the hills outside Cedar Ridge, her first little underground home still sat, quiet and solid, warm even in the dead of winter. A reminder that sometimes, being thrown out into the cold doesn't end you. Sometimes, it teaches you how to build your own shelter.